Now we get into a brief history of the WASP. The WASP, as its own entity, began almost a full year after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So it took a year, but they got there. And the WASP is an interesting story. When you compare the WASP to the Air Transport Auxiliary, the ATA, in Great Britain, which the WASP was modeled after, the ATA began as like, yep, you are an auxiliary. You are not tied to any particular RAF group. It often had male pilots who could not pass the physical to join the Royal Air Force or the Royal Navy for aviation. But they started as one group. And it took, about a month for a woman in the ATA to lobby to have women involved. But the WASP actually was a combination of two different groups. And the first of the groups, which was the first to be established, was the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, or the WAFs. So in that newsreel that we saw in the beginning, they're referencing the WAFs because they were the originals. And the whole idea was, as with, women in manufacturing at the time, in a lot of the wartime propaganda, free a man to fight, which means that you're doing the work, you're taking the place here at the home front only for the duration to free a man to fight and then come home, and then he can, go back to his regular day-to-day. Well, the WAFs, they had a minimum requirement of 500 hours of flight time. Only about 50 women in the United States could qualify having a minimum of 500 flight hours. That means without an instructor. That means verified and logged and different types of planes. So that took the candidate pool down to like 50. But not all 50 of those women decided that, hey, I'm gonna sign up for the WAFs. There were 28 women who joined the WAFs. And that's why we call them the originals, the 28 original women. And on average, they had, as you see on the board here, 1,100 hours of flight experience. This image here is actually a recent accession. We had to our permanent collection at the museum. And you can see right here, there's a plane and it says WAFs and then like small print here. Ultimately, like, they're selling cigarettes. I am not endorsing cigarettes. We know the effects on our lungs and our circulatory system and all parts of our lives. But up here, it actually reads, WAFs, Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron. Theirs is a man-sized job of ferrying warplanes from factories to air bases for Uncle Sam. Expert flyers each and every time, they are the best. The WAFs were not tied to any of the military branches here in the United States. It was all privately funded. And privately funded, what does that mean? It means that you have to sell ad space you have to get endorsements to pay for transportation back. One of the common stories that we hear from the WAFs is that they were ferrying planes right from the get-go. Right since it was really September 1942 that they got enough women to start ferrying these planes. And yes, they would ferry them from, say, the Consolidated factory in San Francisco down to Houston or Pensacola, often like Pensacola. And those planes would then be put on a carrier to go to Northern Africa, Western Europe, or the Pacific, right? How do they get home? That's the question. They had to pay their own way home. They were given these planes, fueled up, said, you have to go here, figure it out. And y'all remember, this is before we had the modern cockpits and indicators that we have now in planes. Oftentimes they had the map sitting in their lap and making sure that they were doing all the calculations right for navigation to make sure they got there when they needed to. So these women had to pay their own way. So they did endorsements. They got paid to do endorsements of like the Chesterfield cigarettes to earn money to help pay for the train ticket, to help pay for the cab fare to get on the train, to then, see if you can call a friend to take me to this other train station to get on another line to finally get home or get to the next factory that they needed to.